Good evening, everyone. I'm Bob Ware. Welcome to the eighth night of the Sandhill Artists Collective Virtual Holiday Gallery Tour. Tonight, we're going to be featuring three artists who belong to the Southern Highland Craft Guild. They will be talking a lot about the guild itself as well as their work. So I'm going to now turn this over to Louise Klickman, the founder of SHAC, and let her introduce the program. Louise?
Thank you, Bob. First of all, I welcome you back. Each day, as we're all coming on, I'm looking to find out who's repeats, who's new. And it's always such a thrill for me to find out who's there and to see old friends and see new faces as well. I found out last night that this series has had a higher attendance rate than last week's series put on by the Smithsonian. So I really want to thank all of you for this. This has really blown us away. The other thing is we're getting a lot of media attention about this all over the country. So please watch for this. And if you get any clippings at all, would you please do me a favor and copy them and send them to me? Because I don't have access to them. So I'm kind of trying to keep track of all this. We hope that after this is over, that Sandhill Artists Collective will grow on its own in our area, and that we'll be able to continue to promote through video and some additional programs that Bob and I are already thinking about. But again, you all have been champions of our cause this holiday. So if you have any ideas at all, please forward them to us. To get today's program at the beginning was a little rocky and a little bit of the challenge, because if any of you all have been to the Southern Highland Crafts Guild fabulous exhibitions, you know they're huge, it's vast, and they have 4 different retail stores, and I mean it's a world unto itself. And so I needed someone who would be able to walk us through this adventure and to tell the story. And boy, did I get lucky. So my friend Robert Mills, who is a wonderful ceramic sculptor, as you will see, well, you're not technically a sculptor, but anyway, he works in clay structures. And Mike Hatch, who is beyond being an incredible glass craftsman, is also the historian for the Southern Highland Crafts Guild. And Amy Brandonsburg work, she's involved in the educational aspects, but her work is just so fitting when we're looking today at not only the 90 years of Appalachian crafts history, but where it is now. So without further ado, I think we should get started. And Mike, we're going to go directly to you, or Robert, would you like to say something first?
Okay. Hey, first, I want to thank Bob and Louise for the opportunity to be here today, and for the three of us to talk a little bit about our experience with the Guild, how we, got into it, what it does, and so you'll hear different aspects. You're going to hear the history, the archival quality of the work there. You're going to hear about the inner workings of the Guild, and also just some of our personal takes as members, because it's a member-driven organization. So we'll talk a little bit about getting in and working through it as well. So I'm introducing the three. We're going to start with Mike. He's going to tell you a little bit about the history of the organization, some of the resources available. We'll then go to Amy, who will talk about the educational aspects, mentoring, and other services to members that the Guild presents. And then then I will talk. First, I'll be showing some slides of my studio and then some work. And then we're going to go back to Mike to talk about his studio practice. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Mike for the introduction and a brief history, really, of the Guild and its engagement and importance in the community.
Hello, how's everybody doing tonight? I just really want to thank Bob and Louise and Shaq for hosting such an incredible lineup of organizations for this series. And I just want to say that I'm honored to be a part of it. And so I'm going to switch here, do a little slideshow, and we'll kind of get into some of the history of the Guild. Let's see, almost there. And here we go. My name is Michael Hatch. I currently serve as the Vice President of the Board of Trustees for the Southern Highland Craft Guild. I am a Guild historian, but not the Guild historian, just to clarify that. Let's see. So the Southern Highland Craft Guild currently represents over 800 craftspeople spanning the Appalachian region of 9 states. In its 90-year history, the Guild has provided support to thousands of makers in our region. But the work that started the Guild actually began decades before the founding of the Guild. And so we're going to dig into that a little bit. And the discussions around forming the Southern Highlands Craft Guild first appeared in December 1928 at the Weaver's Cabin at the top of Connolly's Ridge in Penland, North Carolina. The participants included representatives of Allenstown Cottage Industries, Berea College's Fireside and Student Industries, Brasstown Handicraft Association, which is associated with the John C. Campbell Folk School, Cedar Creek Community Center, Cross North School, the Spinning Wheel, and the Penland Weavers and Potters. A year later, a slightly larger group gathered at the Spinning Wheel in Asheville, North Carolina, which included notable figures such as Frances Goodrich, Lucy Morgan, Olive Campbell, and Alan Eaton. Alan Eaton is the author of Handicrafts of the Southern Highlands, a book published in 1937 that provides a comprehensive documentation of the revival of Appalachian crafts. Currently, the Guild operates 4 brick and mortar retail shops and an extensive online store. On the bottom left, you'll see Moses Cone Manor, which is on the Blue Ridge Parkway in Blowing Rock. Then you'll see Guildcraft, which is on Tunnel Road going out towards Swannanoa. That building actually at one point was the headquarters of the Southern Highlands Craft Guild. Then you'll see our newest gallery in Biltmore Village. And then on the right is our headquarters at the Folk Art Center on the Blue Ridge Parkway in Asheville. The Folk Art Center has 3 rotating exhibition spaces as well as the Allenstown retail shop. To learn more, you can check out our website at southernhighlandcraftguild.org. So I was thinking about Kate's wall of badass women from last night's presentation from Black Mountain College Museum. And the Guild was also formed by a group of badass women who first came to the region as teachers at the numerous missionary settlement schools that started popping up in Appalachia in the post-construction period after the Civil War. The women who taught and worked in these schools came mostly from northern cities and affluent backgrounds. They sought to uplift rural mountain communities through the revitalization and marketing of traditional crafts. Recently, I took a deep dive into the formative years of the Southern Highland Craft Guild through my thesis research for the MA in Critical Craft Studies program at Warren Wilson College. My research examined the work that began over 100 years ago and which laid the foundation for the thriving craft scene found in the Appalachian region today. My research was presented through an exhibition I curated at the Center for Craft entitled Crafted Roots, Stories and Objects from the Appalachian Mountains. Crafted Roots presents this history through audio extracts from oral histories from the Guild's archives and objects selected from the Guild's permanent collection of over 5,000 objects. The Guild's archive contains over 180,000 items, including documents, photographs, oral history recordings, and videos which document the history of the Southern Highland Craft Guild and its members. Frances Goodrich was one of these badass women who arrived in the 1880s to teach at one of these settlement schools. Shortly after her arrival in rural Madison County, she was gifted with a 40-year-old double bow knot coverlet from one of the members of the community, which is seen here in this image beside Frances Goodrich in her later years. Goodrich credits this gift as the inspiration for her work to revitalize traditional mountain crafts. In 1897, she founded Allenstand Cottage Industries. She outlined its purpose in a leaflet that stated her goals were to bring money into the communities far from market and to give paying work to women in homes too isolated to permit them to find it for themselves, and to save from extinction the old-time crafts while producing things of value and beauty. 30 years later, Goodrich would donate the thriving Allenstand Industries to the Southern Highland Craft Guild. The name Allenstand now hangs above the entrance to the retail shop at the Folk Arts Center. So now we're going to look at some images from my exhibition, and we're going to talk about some of the objects from the collection that I've used. So this is a sample of the gift coverlet. So in the 1980s, Guild member Barbara Miller recreated the famous gift coverlet so that it could be always on display at the Permanent Collections Gallery at the Folk Arts Center. Textiles need to have periods of rest. They cannot be exposed or displayed permanently. And so this recreation gave the original a chance to rest. And for my exhibition, I was able to use a sample from her recreation. Also in this image, you'll see two small books, and those are pattern books, textile pattern books from the 1890s. And these would be used for marketing, and you could demonstrate different patterns and different types of textiles. The book on the right is opened up to a page on denim. So the exhibition was laid out in a way to kind of look at the missionaries as well as the mountain crafts people who they came here to work with. So I had one section here that was set up as a parlor that represents the realm of the missionaries. And then on the opposite corner of the gallery is set up as a cabin, which represents the realm of the mountain crafts people. And so here we have some cases of wood carvings that came from the collection. And we have examples of work produced by Jack Eichbaum, Wade Martin, Nolan Beaver, and student work from Berea College. And I chose these wood carvings because they really kind of depicted, they were a depiction of the way of life and kind of the way things were in the late 1800s, early 1900s. The exhibition also includes some baskets from the collection. Many of these were from Frances Goodrich's original personal collection, which she donated to the Southern Highland Craft Guild when it formed. And that was what our collection has been built on from that. And here's a Cherokee woven wall mat, natural dyes. It's a very impressive piece of work. And then from the spinning wheel, I have this series. It's a 3-part series. There's 2 shown here, and another piece is on display in the parlor. And this was the covered wagon series made by Etta Mae DeWeese, somewhere in the 1928. And it composed of 3 parts. Here we see on the top is the template on pen and ink on cloth that she used to make the stitched piece below it, which is made from wool and cotton. And then in the parlor, the other piece that matches the same imagery is a watercolor on linen. Another significant piece from the collection is this textile that looks at the first, represents the first fair, the first guild fair in 1948. And in this textile, you can see they've stitched in all the different processes that were used by the guild craftsmen. We've even got a glass blower, blacksmith, You've got people dancing. And so, yeah, that was the first fair in 1948. While there have been many books published and exhibitions curated that examine this time period, my exhibition, Crafted Roots, was the first to allow missionaries and mountain makers to tell this story in their own words through extracts from oral history recordings. Through these extracts, we learn how the missionaries, who are often presented as the agents of change, were also changed by the people that they met when they arrived here. I feel it is very important. Oral histories are a very important part in all of my research that I do. Because as I said, there's a lot that can be written about people, and a lot can look back and try and guess what was going on. And I really enjoy allowing people to speak for themselves in their own words. So I'll post some links. There's all the audio is available from the exhibition and transcripts online, and there's a YouTube video. And yeah, so the audio in the exhibition came through 2 different amplifiers and 4 different speakers with 2 different loops. And so the voices move through these different speakers and move around the gallery. And it's exciting. And I think that listening to these oral histories and reading along with them in the transcripts really gives you a new perspective on the work that was being done. So the Guild, it functions with a very small staff, and we mostly are run by committees that are filled with members that volunteer their time to support the Guild and keep everything going strong. So now I'm going to introduce Amy Brandenburg. She's just been appointed the chair of our education committee, and she's going to talk a little bit about the work they do and some of her work that she does.
So, hi. Mike was just mentioning about the committees and the fact that we were able to keep our staff small because so many of our members step up and volunteer their time and make this Guild, you know, a working family, as well as a working for us as artists. We have a number of committees, just a few to mention. We have a membership committee that takes care of the actual artist members. We have the finance committee, the annual meeting committee, the fair committee, which is a very important job. And then of course the standards committee, who decides who gets to come into the Guild. Now our Guild is very high quality craftsmanship, and it's very important for us to have excellent design as well. And so the standards committee are those who decide whose standards and design are up to, you know, what we want to have as a part of our group. And we are, I wouldn't say picky, but we like quality. And if your quality is not quite good enough, that's one of the reasons why I got involved. When I finally became a member after 3 tries, and a lot of members have stories about how many times it took them to finally get in, I decided that I would join the mentoring committee, which is a subcommittee of the education committee. Now, I was just appointed and haven't started yet, being the chair of the education committee, and the education committee has been divided into many subcommittees, one of which is mentoring. We also have the demonstrators that you often see when you come into the Folk Arts Center. There's always often two people out there demonstrating their craft so that you can see how we do what we do, and why it's expensive and how much work actually goes into all of these things that we make. We also have outreach programs where we send people to some of the smaller house museums, like the Smith McDowell House here in Asheville, and places of that nature, to, you know, to represent the Guild and to also teach people about craft. We have a number of like wood carvers that often will go out there, or maybe we have a weaver or somebody who's willing to actually spend their day talking to people about craft and what we do, and to not lose those heritage crafts like we've talked about. We also have some outreach to our member organizations like Penland and Arrowmont and John C. Campbell, places like that, that would be also part of our education directive. Explain what a member is. A craft person who shows. How do you get in? How are you tenured? How long are you a member? Can someone volunteer? Is not an artist. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so let's hit those one at a time. So a member has been juried into the Craft Guild. So to be juried in, you start by submitting images of your work. And a small group committee goes through those images and says, oh, yes, we'd like to see more of that. Or I don't think that's quite up to the quality we're looking for yet. And so you get a yes or a no at the image jury. And if you get a yes, you go to the object jury, where you actually turn in your actual objects, and the standards committee will look at all of the detail. They'll pick it up, they'll turn it upside down, they'll check your stitches, they'll make sure that everything is really as excellent as it can be. And then if you make it through the object jury, you are a member. And yes, you are basically tenured. You are in once you're in. Unless you really completely change mediums. If you completely change mediums, then you have to jury in again as in a new medium. You are a lifetime member, basically, unless you move out of the region or you change your craft. And then we do have a lot of volunteers that we work with. Volunteers can come and help us with the fair. They can help us in the library with the collections. They can help us in a number of ways. So just reach out if you've ever wanted to be a volunteer for our group. We'd love to have you. So as I said, it took me 3 tries to get into the guild. And I always wished that I had somebody to sort of, I don't know, hold my hand a little bit and tell me what I needed to do to raise my game so that I was good enough to get into the guild. How was I gonna finally break through that and have them see my work as valid quality work? So one of the things that we did, the previous chair of the education committee, Pat Bauman, she created the mentoring committee. And what we eventually evolved to do, instead of one-on-one mentoring with artists, is we offer workshops. So we'll talk for about an hour and a half about the application, which is extensive, and we want to know all of the details of how you got started, what your education is, all of these things. And then we will hook you up with someone, an actual guild member in your craft, in your actual medium, and they can talk to you about your specific work and your photographs. Are they good enough? All that kind of stuff. So it's been a wonderful program that I've been a part of, just allowing people to be a quality, show off their quality work as much as they can so that they can become a part of this family, this membership, this guild. And so I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself and where I came from. I was a traditional metalsmith in undergraduate school. So I went to Columbia College in Chicago, and I did all kinds of coppersmithing, silversmithing, things of that nature, and learned how to do that. And I worked for a few jewelers after that. And then I decided that what I wanted to do was history. I wanted more of a history. I wanted a history of jewelry, basically, but what I ended up getting was a history of costumes and fashion. So I went to NYU and I got my master's at NYU. And what I was able to do was I was able to go into we had a partnership with the Metropolitan Museum. I was able to go into the actual collection of the Metropolitan Museum and see real garments from the eras that I was interested in. What I came away with was a love for the turn of the century styles, the Art Nouveau, the arts and crafts movement, all of those things that were sort of a reaction to the Industrial Revolution, and how mass-produced things were becoming and how we were losing that craftsmanship. And those were the pieces that really spoke to me. So that is what kind of shows up in my work. I do the Arts and Crafts Conference here in Asheville. Asheville is very much a turn of the century town. It really got its beginnings. The Biltmore House was built between 1897 and 1905, and the town really sprung up in the early years of the 1900s to about 1920 or so, and really got to be part of a boon. If you can see even the French doors in my house, this is 1926-27 Craftsman House. So that history, that reaction to that, the stylized flowers that show up, the Frank Lloyd Wright stained glass, those kinds of things really show up in my work. And I found a medium when I was a jeweler in college, and then I went and I did costumes for theater for many, many years. After my costume history program, I used that, and I worked at the Shakespeare Theater, and we made all sorts of amazing costumes from many eras. And then when I decided to move to Asheville, it was bring your own job. There was no theater here to do. So I decided to go back to jewelry. I found a new medium called precious metal clay. If you've ever heard of precious metal clay, basically what it is very minute, like microscopic silver particles that are suspended in a clay binder that allows it to act like clay. And then when you fire the piece, the clay part burns completely away, the metal particles melt together, and I'm left with a solid piece of silver. So I'm able to sculpt and create things that would be very, very difficult with sheet metal. Either you'd be etching or you'd be hammering or you'd be something like that. And what made me really happy was that I never had to pick up a hammer again. So I can make jewelry and I can make all sorts of very intricate, detailed pieces without really having to hammer or use caustic chemicals or things of that nature. So I'm going to show you a little video of my work. This is a process video so that you can see what I do and how it comes together. And here we go. So let me share that with you now. In this video, I'll be demonstrating how I create one of my pendants out of precious metal clay. First, I open a new package of clay. I unwrap it and cut off the piece that I'm going to use. Then I make sure that the rest of the clay is wrapped securely and put back into the package. I ball up my clay and then roll it out using playing cards as depth guides. Next, I take a stamp I have created and brush it with a bit of olive oil so the clay will release. Then I raise the depth of my guides and use a plexiglass plate to evenly impress my image. Then I carefully lift up the stamp and cut out the image. At this point, I can even up the edges. Next, I carve sections out to achieve negative space. Then I flip it back over and lay it on a rounded form so it will dry in a curved shape. Once it is dry, I can take a nail file and refine the edges. Sanding pads and a needle file will refine the rest of the piece. Then I add a bit of detail to the back. I begin preparing to set the stone. I drill all the way through the piece. Then I use a stone setting burr to create a seat for my stone. I add a bit of water and place the stone in the seat. Next, I roll out a new piece of clay to create the bail. I lift the bail and lay it over a straw before attaching it to the piece. To create a bond between the piece and the bail, I wet them both before attaching. I work the clay until it grips and make sure everything is aligned. Once the piece is completely dry, I set it on a bed of vermiculite in a crucible in the kiln. The kiln fires at 1650 degrees for 30 minutes. Watch it shrink as the particles center together. Once the piece is cooled, I can remove it from the kiln. Now we move into the finishing stages. First, I burnish the piece in soapy water with a steel brush. Then I use an agate burnisher to brighten the silver. Next, the piece goes into a liver of sulfur mixture and is dipped until I achieve the color I want. Once that happens, I neutralize the liver of sulfur acid in a baking soda and water bath. Finally, I polish the raised areas of the piece with a polishing pad. And there you have the finished piece. So there you go. In a nutshell, that's what precious metal clay does. I always say it makes the impossible possible because I create little structures and sculptures with it. What finally got me into the guild were my tiny castles. I make tiny little castles with all sorts of little details, partly because I found out that there was once a Brandenburg castle in Germany, and that just spurred me on. And I was like, okay, let's see what else I can make now. So I love tiny architectural elements and things of that nature. And that's just been sort of how I've evolved in my work, and I've gotten into the guild. It took 5 years for me to get into the guild. I think my work needed to mature so that it fit our standards. And then I've just done everything I can possibly do with the guild. I demonstrate at the Folk Arts Center. I participate in all of the fairs that I can. I've been a part of the mentoring committee since I started, and that's I'm actually going to hand it over to Robert. Let's hear Robert's story, and then I'll list my website. You can have a look for yourself, but we can also, if we have time, we can come back and I can show you a little bit of the website. All right, so Robert, how are you? Let's make sure you're unmuted. And you're going to explain your experience with the guild as well as your work for us to
Thank you, Amy. That was really wonderful. I enjoyed seeing the process. It was great. Okay. Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about my work, and how I got here. I've been in Nashville for about 6 years, and I came here because I had retired in Texas as dean of an art school there. And when Karen, my wife, and I were looking for where to go, where we might go when we retired, we knew of Asheville because Karen had lived in the Cullowhee area back in the 80s. And I had been fortunate enough to teach at Penland in the 70s. And like a lot of people in this area, I left a piece of my heart at that school. So it was very cool to be able to come back and then sort of reacquaint myself with people there, and then the organizations here. I worked with the Center for Craft when we first got here because I had been sent there as part of a think tank group when I was down in Texas. So we knew people. We came here, and when you live in this area, you find that about every third person is an artist, and the other two are probably writers or musicians. And so it's a very welcoming community for people in the crafts. I joined the Southern Highland Craft Guild after I got my studio set up and went back to work. And the first year I applied, I didn't get in because I sent in a body of work that was sort of, well, I do a little of this and I do a little of that and some of this. And the Guild is much more interested in a sort of focused, continuous body of work that looks like it will sustain itself over time. So it took me another time to put that together. And I got in and I started working. I wanted to just participate in events. So I went to some of the craft fairs. I was up at the Folk Arts Center. I've shown my work. There are a series of group shows that take place at the Folk Arts Center on a regular basis that are juried by the curator there. And I was able to show my work in some of those. And then I participated in a fair, and I hadn't been in a fair for about 40 years. So it was kind of fun to be back in it and start all over again in that activity. I've been in 2 virtual fairs this fall, which is a whole other body of activity with in this case with other organizations, but it's a new world. We're all learning how to communicate by Zoom and how to show our work on videos. And so what I thought I would do as part of this is to show you a video of my studio and some of the equipment that's used there. And then I'm going to present a couple of short videos, one in which I sort of explain what my work is about, and then another I use an example of a sculpture. With the Guild, I'm also a member of the annual meeting committee because I thought one of the great ways to find out what the Guild does is find out what they talk about. So, so I've been on that committee for a couple of years. Our meeting this year was canceled because of the pandemic. This is the pandemic, as you know, has wreaked havoc on lots of things, and a lot of the craft organizations and craftspeople are sort of struggling to meet marketing and audience issues during this time. We're all going to come out of it with some new skills and new approaches, but in the meantime, it's a big change. So my work started in the 70s, and I use a lot of processes that I've used continuously for the last 50 years. So Bob, if you want to start the studio video, we'll go to that. Studio and the materials and processes that take place there. Arbitrary Form Studio is a ceramic studio. I sometimes work with other materials here, but really this is a ceramic studio. And so as you look around the building, you'll see pieces and tools, and it's arranged. This was an old two-bedroom apartment that was recreated as a studio. You're looking at a throwing area with the electric wheel. You'll see an extruder next to it that will be set up in the middle of the room. That's another processing part. Over here, this is a work table, but also a reclamation area where I reprocess clay. Over here, a rolling slab roller that just goes up against the wall when it's not in use. More clay tools. Anybody familiar with a kitchen will recognize a lot of these tools. This is a work area, a work table with a canvas cover to help release the clay. Over here, another work table that I use mostly for storage or just putting pieces out of the way when I'm working on something else. Another storage area. In between up on the wall is a glaze test area, and that's a very important part of the studio. I use about 8 or 9 cone 04 slips and about the same number of glazes in various combinations. And so when I'm glazing pieces, it's really helpful to have the color chart out in front of me. So the rest of the studio is, well, there's a bathroom here, but I've created a new feature in the bathroom, which is a clay trap, by putting a double filtered system so that when I rinse off tools, glazes, whatever, they go into a bucket, which then filters into a second container before things go down the drain, which helps really well. I use that hose as my basic wash-off unit, both in and outside. Then in this room, this is the kiln room, and the kiln room was an old bedroom. We've remodeled it. You'll see it's lined with a refractory material so that it reflects heat back in. It has 2 electric kilns. These are computer-controlled kilns. I generally fire to cone 06 and 04 for my sculptural pieces. That means around 1824 to 1954 degrees Fahrenheit. Or I'll fire to cone 6, about 2100 and some degrees, for some of the functional wear that I do. All of my rooms serve a couple of purposes. So this is also the area where I store plaster molds that I use for shaping parts. These are the kiln stilts and furniture, so that when you fire kilns, a lot of times you'll put shelves in the kiln so that you can stack multiple pieces. So this kiln, the electric kiln, this one's a Scud, this was an L&L. They're great pieces of equipment. The wonderful things that have happened in ceramics lately are mostly technical. You know, things like computer controls on kilns. It saves powder staying up all night. There are things in materials, blankets, refractory blankets and things that really help. And more recent tools like 3D printers that enable ceramists to make shapes that they've never been able to do before. I work in 3 basic hand building techniques that I'll talk about in another video: coiling, slab rolling, press molding, and then I also work with extruding, both with hand and power extruders, as a way of shaping the clay. So the studio is set up for those processes. Today, when you saw it, it's set up for a series of demonstrations. Normally, I will do one thing at a time, you know, and I will make like 40 or 50 throne pieces, or 20 to 60 extruded and hand-built parts, and then I make objects out of all those parts. The cycle can take 3 months to finish a piece, but today we're going to go through that very quickly in a series of videos that will include making parts, assembling parts, finishing and carving the parts, and then glazing them and getting them ready to fire. Thank you. Okay, yeah, that video and 3 other partner videos are all available on my website at robertmilnes.com. The others are lengthier versions of how the pieces are done. I want to show a couple of short videos. Let's start with the first one, and then there are 2 videos that accompany. They're also on the website, but they accompany a show that I'm in Dallas. That's a virtual show. Most of the work is in my studio, and these videos were made in our garage, in a space where I used the booth that I normally use for a craft fair as a video setup area. So if you want to start those, the show is called Questioning Cognition, and you'll get a sense of, well, how my brain works. The deal with the way we depict the fact that we think we know something. Often we're wrong. We often believe theories or constructs that really don't hold true, but they sort of guide the way we look and see things, look at and see things, which shapes what we think of as truth further. So it's important to look at those things closely. The pieces in this show use symbols and mapping systems that are used to trace things like brainwaves, to trace things like the grids on maps, to show meditative patterns. They use coded imagery like Morse code. They're not shapes or patterns that I invent as much as I find in the world and then use so that we can think about how they might influence the way we think or deliver ideas. Okay, all right. So there are about 15 or 20 of those videos on my website at robertmilnes.com talking about individual pieces and processes. And so if you go there, you'll see them in the gallery sections and find out more about the work. But I want to make sure we've got a chance to see Mike's work because it's really fascinating. And so I'm going to turn this over to Mike next.
Hello, here I am again. All right. So I've got another slideshow that kind of starts to look at my studio some. Let me turn on my screen share and get this going. Great presentations, Amy and Robert. I really enjoy seeing about your work. All right, so here we go. So now we're going to talk about Crucible Glassworks, my studio and gallery. This is the current location of the studio in Weaverville, North Carolina. In 1997, my wife Hillary and I moved to the Asheville area, really because things were still affordable and there was a great craft scene here. we could buy a house, start a business, and raise a family, always knowing that we had the support of a larger craft community. In 1998, we rented a storefront on North Lexington Avenue and founded Crucible Glassworks as a mom and pop glass shop. It was a place for me to explore what could be done with molten glass, for my wife Hillary to figure out how to market the wide variety of work that I make. She runs the gallery and deals with our wholesale accounts and our Etsy sales online, and there would not be a Crucible Glassworks without her. 2 weeks after opening our first studio, our first child was born. 2 years later, our second child was born. They both grew up in the shop, and they both helped in our booths. So it's hard to believe that those two are now off in college, and it's fun looking back at some of these old pictures. So really, now we're going to start looking a little bit at some of my work. I'm really fascinated by the process of taking molten glass and turning it into solid items. I really like to demonstrate and share my love and passion with the material with other people. So the studio is an open studio where people are welcome to come in and watch demonstrations. And when there's not a pandemic, we teach and do things like that. So a lot of times I've kind of grew up, I was taught in the ways of the early pioneer spirit of the American glass movement. And a lot of times I'll work by myself, but there's also often times where, glass blowing is really teamwork when you start getting into larger, more complicated pieces. So now we're going to watch a little video that shows the process of making of my new series, the Amorphous Solid series. Here we go. So we're going to see how we make that. So these are canes of colored glass that I've made by stretching color, pasting clear. We're going to roll those up on a clear bubble, and that's going to give me a series of stripes in my color. Though glass blowers move pretty fast, we have to move quickly because it's always cooling down. This video is sped up a little bit just so we can get through it in a reasonable amount of time. So what I'm working on here is joining 3 pieces together of different colors. So I had my blue piece, now I'm making a green piece that I'll split in 2 and place the blue part in the middle. Right, so this technique is an old Italian technique. It's called incomo. Now I'm going to attach to the bottom, break it off of the other pipe, and then I can work on the other side. And at the same time, I'm setting up this other cup that was left, and now I've joined those together. And so this is a piece that gives me horizontal bands of color. But for the waterfall series that this is part of, I want that color to be separated vertically. And what I do is I poke a hole in the side of the piece, and then I'm going to set up a collar on another blowpipe. We'll attach it to that opening. That's the collar. Right, so now you can see how we've turned that to be a vertical pattern. And that's something I use a lot in my work, in a lot of different series. Most of the time I would take this, gather over it, blow it out, and it would be a blown vessel. But for the amorphous solid, I'm going to actually blow a hole and fill it with clear glass so that I can make a solid piece that has this color on the outside. There's the bowl I made. And I'm heating up the gather of glass, and I'm hoping will be just enough to fill the inside of that cup, right? So everything has to always be above 900 degrees or else it will break. So that cup was staying warm in a kiln. My friend Sterling pulled it out so I could pick it up. Now I'm just trying to get everything set up and starting to shape it. These will get flattened with cork paddles. This kind of tricky there. Everything is glowing, and we're trying to flatten it on just the right orientation where that blue band stretches down the middle of the flat side. Then from there, I'll start shaping that flattened piece. Using a variety of tools. So what I'm pulling on now is kind of what's going to be towards the bottom of the piece. What's attached to the iron there will be the top of the piece. In a moment, we're going to break it off of this iron and have it attached to a different iron so we can work on that top. Now here, I'm just trying to get everything straightened up a little bit before we transfer it. I'm going to miss the transfer, but in a moment, here we go. I've turned it around and it's stuck on that other pipe that was there. I'm sorry, but hot glass is just so cool. Even after over 30 years, I still just this piece went through some more torching and some more stretching and heating to get the final shape. But again, for the sake of time, it's going to end pretty soon here. So you kind of get the idea of how we're isolating heat in certain areas, right? So when I pull and stretch, I've got to make sure even where it's connected at the bottom there, it's not getting below 900 degrees. So there's the finished piece. And so this is actually a piece I just made a week ago. I made it last Friday, and on Wednesday I submitted it to an exhibition at the Toyama Museum of Glass in Japan. Fingers crossed, we'll see what happens. So here's some other work. This is the Waterfall Switchback series, and this is kind of that same process, but these have been blown instead of solid, so those are hollow pieces. Here's another piece called Balance. This is the same techniques, but using black and white. It's hard to see in this picture, but the interior of the white sections is black, and the interior of the black sections is white, and then they're shaped and pulled out with that clear band in the middle so you can see. So these are the sunshine bowls. That's an example of just using the encomo without changing the axis is what we call it when we turn it sideways, and you can see the horizontal banding of color. And so really, you know, much to the Guild's chagrin, I don't work in a single series or a single vision. I make a lot of different things. I make all kinds of vases. I make all kinds of barware. Really, I just like making all kinds of different things out of glass. So this is an example of some solid sculpted work that I do, and these are made in components where I have to make the components, keep everything hot, and then I'll start. So I'll make the head, I'll make the hands, I'll make the hat, whatever they're holding in their hands. That'll all be in a kiln. I'll make the body, and then I'll start using my an oxy propane torch that will spot heat certain areas, and I can start joining all those components together to make pieces like this. This piece is entitled Possession. The base is made out of leftover siding from my studio and fire bricks from the interior of an old furnace. So I also do some painting on glass, where I take powdered glass pigments, mix them into ink or paint consistencies with different mediums, and then they go in the kiln and get fired. And these pieces will be fired after every layer of paint. So most of these go through multiple firings. So I paint on blown vessels, and I paint on flat glass. And so this series, the interior monologue, you can see there's a little window up there on top of his head. So if you look inside of that window, you've got a monkey at a chalkboard. And these are actual physics equations dealing with nuclear physics and trajectory physics. And this piece is titled Monkey Business, because it's stuff we shouldn't be monkeying around. Some flat glass paintings I'll go through real quick. Narcissus Crow, War Child, The Art of War. Now this piece is a collage, a hand-painted, hand-drawn collage of political cartoons. I've got from National Geographic, the Killing Skulls from the Killing Field. I've got angels from Albrecht Dürer's engravings. And then this little village here is drawn from the back of a pack of Camel cigarettes. So I also do commission work. This is a chandelier that I made with the Heirloom companies in South Carolina. There's a close-up. They do all the metal work, and I did the glass work. Just a quick connection, a quick side note is the Heirloom companies are the ones that built the awesome glass and metal staircase at the new Momentum Gallery that Jordan was talking about the other night. And so they do amazing work. I'm really proud to work with them on any project they call me for. I also do baptismal fonts. I've done several for different churches in the region. But really what I like to do is play with glass. And I'm letting these two young girls blow a bubble with a bicycle pump.
Oh, that's
We
cool.
sure had a lot of fun with that. So this is me at Star Works in North Carolina, and I was there for Glass Fest, and I did a demo of a flaming face jug. So I'm spitting fire out of the mouth of a glass face jug right there. Kind of fun. So I love doing demonstrations for people. When I was in college, we built temporary furnaces. This one was at the Chrysler Museum. They were having a big glass show. So that's me and my wife, Hillary, there, my friend Guido, who's a glass blower in the Bay Area now. And standing next to him is Harvey Littleton, the father of the American Studio Glass Movement, who was the guest speaker for that weekend. It was great to be able to meet him and hang out. And so then based on that idea, recently, a couple of years ago, I took a bunch of scrap material from my shop and I built a version of this that we didn't have to build every time we went. So the one at the Chrysler, we'd build it on a Friday, blow glass Saturday and Sunday, and then we'd take it all apart. So I made this little one and mounted it in a garden cart so I could take it to places like the Folk Art Center or to private events at the Grove Park Inn. Here's a little demo at the Folk Center. All right, and we're almost done. And so back to talking about the studio a little bit and us as a business. Crucible Glassworks has always been about building community. And with the current pandemic, we became worried about our friends and local makers who have structured their business models around craft fairs, which have all been canceled. So we began hosting a garden gallery event once a month. We'd invite a handful of our friends and artists to sell the things they make. We charge no booth fee. Masks are required. Tents are set up 20 feet apart. And advertising is limited to avoid large crowds. In fact, it's limited to participants posting on social media. It is designed so they can connect with their local clientele and that my clients might connect with them and their clients might connect with me. And so here's some of the people we've had. That's Owen Riedesel of Harvest Cap Forge, a young man that I've been mentoring, even though we do different mediums. He should be graduating high school this week, and then he'll be traveling to the college, the building college in Charleston, I think it is, where he'll continue his blacksmithing. We have flowers. and we have ceramics. And so we will be having one more garden gallery event. It'll be next Saturday, the 19th. And we'll have 4 or 5 guests. We'll have the Wildwood Flower Farm with great bouquets. We'll have Owen Riedesel selling his blacksmith work. We'll have Twin Denims and Laura Keys Pottery and Pride and Archive, who do fine woodworking. So that's it for me, and I'm going to pass it back to, I guess, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was great. We've got a question for you immediately here. Joyce Smith is asking, the glass works at 900 degrees. So how quickly does the glass cool from 900 degrees?
So actually, it needs to always be above 900 degrees or else it will break. So everything that I make will go into an annealing oven, like a kiln, and slowly cool down overnight. You see, the glass, when I gather it, is over 2,000 degrees. And the glass will stop moving at about 1,020 maybe. And so depending on the process, the glass does cool very quickly. It's a lot of going back and forth from my workbench to a reheating chamber that's kind of similar to a forge, but much bigger, with a big fire burning in it. So it's really a lot of back and forth, getting up, sitting down, getting up, sitting down, and within that, we're trying to isolate heat where certain parts are moving and certain parts aren't. So, and the only way you can tell is by how things are moving or by the color of the glass, so that we don't have thermometers or anything to really help us answer those questions.
Cool.
That was great.
It's so cool to watch you work.
Well, we have really had a remarkable afternoon with you guys. And this has been really the first program where we've looked specifically at a variety of processes. We did not get enough time to look at finished pieces with you, Amy, and you, Robert. So if you will email me, I'm going to try to address that tomorrow and send some things out, because in particular, and also your face jugs, Mike, because all of that relates back so much to our history. I mean, face jugs are such a significant part of North Carolina history, and I've never seen anybody do them in glass.
Here's one. He's got his Santa hat on, but
Very nice.
I think you have a sense of humor, Mike. It's in there somewhere. Yes. So, are there any more questions? I know we ran a little late. There's a lot of content here, but do we have any more questions? I think Bob has unmuted everybody to give you a chance to ask questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was quite fascinating. All three of the artists showed a lot.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Enjoyed it very much.
Well, we have had a great time and a full week. I just would like to tell you that next week we have something, 2 really interesting, very contemporary galleries and presentations that I think you're going to enjoy. So we're going to take the weekend off. Monday, we're going to come back for the Center for Craft. Many of you have talked a little bit about the Center for Craft through these presentations, so now you'll not only be able to see their exhibition and their new John Cram gallery, but you will actually be able to visit and see what they do nationally in terms of education in contemporary crafts. And then Tuesday is Tracy Morgan's gallery. Tracy, I understand, has come here from New York, and her beautiful contemporary gallery is very New York centric. Robert?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's New York centric, but it has an attitude. The work that she shows is artists from this area mostly.
Well, I'm really anxious to see it. Bob, do you have anything to add?
This was a wonderful session. I really enjoyed all three of you. It is always remarkable to see just how clever people can be at doing the things they do. I guess all my life I've been fascinated by how people work, and everybody, regardless of what sort of occupation they have, learns and practices little tricks that the rest of us would never think of, and that's pretty cool. So thank you for educating us. And have a great weekend, everybody. And we will see you on Monday. Take care.
Great. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.